Hey guys, welcome back to Shop Life. In today's video, we're going to be discussing on ways to lower your car. I'm going to go over 3 basic ways to lower it, which is the cheapest option, the easiest option, and the most practical. So we're going to start out with the cheapest option, which is going to be lowering springs. So lowering springs, they pretty much come in fancy colors. You can pick whatever color you want. They're usually made in China. They do have race-specific springs as well, but I'm just going to be discussing on the cheapest ones because most people that are going to be using lowering springs to get their car low are main people that are just going to be looking for something cheap that they could do right away. So lowering springs, what they do is they replace the spring that comes stock on your car. So if you have a spring over strut assembly, you just disassemble the assembly, put a new spring on, and if you're going to be putting this lowering springs, I suggest getting performance shocks or struts. So you're going to put those on, get your little strut mount, whatever you have, put that on, and then just put it back in the car. That's the cheapest way to lower your car, is through lowering springs. So like I said, you can buy those on eBay, any other like racing sites or any aftermarket parts sites like ECS Tuning, FCP Euro, anything like that, you can buy those lowering springs. So let me go ahead and go over the pros and cons for lowering springs. So like I said, the pros would be it's very cheap, it's easy to install. You can do it with just a pair of spring compressors that you could buy at like a Harbor Freight, or even you can rent them out at a parts store. And since they're like cheap, you really don't have to worry if you mess them up, if you scratch them up, if they start rusting. None of that, doesn't really matter. And then another pro is, well, this could be considered a pro and a con, is adjustability. A lot of people don't really want to have to worry about adjusting their ride height and going through all that. So this is just a quick and easy way, just go ahead and put it on without having to worry about any of that. Now let's go to the cons. So the con can also be adjustability, because some people want to be able to adjust their ride height if they're going to be running different wheel setups, they want a bigger tire, or if they're going to be like, traveling cross country and they don't want to have it that low, they might want to raise it up. So you can't really adjust the ride height once you have lowering springs. So because those springs are just set at where they're set. There's no way to make them higher or lower unless you're going to cut them and stuff like that, which that pretty much ruins the purpose of even buying lowering springs. So another con is if you're going to be using stock shocks or even stock replacement shocks, the springs, since they are going to be riding lower than your stock suspension, they're going to actually be blown out faster. And also, whenever you're lowering a car, you're going to be blowing out a lot more suspension. Since the car is not meant to be riding that low, you're going to put more strain on more suspension parts. So if you're going to be using lowering springs, I highly suggest getting some kind of performance shocks like Coney's or Bilsteins. There's plenty of them out there, and depending on what kind of car you have, you can just research on the forum and see what people have had success with and use those. And when you do install lowering springs, as with any time you lower your car, the suspension geometry is going to change. So you might get extra negative camber, and if it's too much, you might have to buy camber and caster plates. That way you can adjust the camber and have your alignment specs still proper. And that's going to be actually common for most ways that you modify your suspension. You're going to need to do that. So where can you buy these lowering springs? If you're going to look for just cheap lowering springs, your best way to get them is through eBay. But even then, I still suggest that you look on the forums and just check out reviews, what people have used and what they've had success with. On eBay, you can find all those colorful springs for like $100 to $200. They're really cheap, and you'll get all 4 springs, and then you just have to buy your struts and shocks and your strut mounts and shock mounts, whatever you need to get. And you should be able to get the whole setup under $300 to $400, and you should be good to go. And other places you can buy them are any other aftermarket shops or aftermarket websites like ECS Tuning, FCP Euro, all of those. The ones I've listed are mainly for European cars, but you can find other websites like that for depending on whatever car you have. And one thing about lowering springs, it is not the same as just cutting your stock springs. When you cut your stock springs, depending on what kind of spring you have, you can have a linear spring or a progressive spring, and that's just going to ruin your whole ride quality. A lot of people might say that's not true, but it all depends on what kind of spring you have. Most cars do not have linear springs, so if you cut them, you're going to be pretty much messing with where the rebound is and all of that. So do not cut your springs. You can buy lowering springs for $100 or $200. If you can't spend that much money on lowering your car, I don't suggest that you should lower it. Instead, save up, make sure your car is maintained properly. That way, once you do lower it, if something does happen, you don't really have to stress about where you're going to get the money to fix the rest of the car. Alright, so the next method of lowering your car is coilovers. These are actually my preferred and favorite method to lower a car, mainly because they're adjustable, at least in ride height. You can adjust the ride height on whenever you need to. So if you were to buy a different set of wheels and you wanted to make it lower or make it higher, it's easier to do it. Let me go and show you what a coilover looks like. So here's the front coilover for an E46. As you can see, coilovers, they have adjustability for ride height right on the actual strut assembly itself. And if you for the rear, you have it on an actual separate thing, which I'll show you as well. But you can adjust how high you want your car. Some coilovers also have adjustability for dampening and stuff like that, which will be up on the top. That way you could do it with pretty much just opening the hood or opening your trunk. So if you do get these, like I said, they vary in terms of quality and in terms of functions pretty much, like the dampening and all that. So here's a front coilover. Now here's a rear coilover for an E46. And this is pretty much what will allow you to adjust the height. And this is what will allow you to adjust the height. You can wind it up to make it higher, wind it down to lower it. So coilovers are almost the same way for installation as lowering springs. You're going to get the whole coilover assembly. Most manufacturers, they send them already assembled, minus the strut mount or shock mount, whatever you have. And that's the only thing that you have to assemble. And usually they do not require spring compressors to actually compress the spring and put on the strut mount, because they're already lowered. And if you do need to lower it more so you can get the strut mount on, you just wind it down all the way so you can put the strut mount on and then tighten the bolt or nut. That way it's good to go. So that's why I like coilovers, because they're really easy to set up and they go in the same way that lowering springs go in. So coilovers are pretty much the easiest to install, mainly because they don't require any spring compressors. Well, at least usually they don't. So what you would basically do, you just wind down the coilover all the way and just compress it with your hands and put the strut mount on and put the nut on. And then there you have it. So that's the easiest way to install it. So now let me go and say the pros and cons for the coilovers. Pros, adjustability, which in some cases might be a con for some people. Another pro is it's very easy to install. Another pro is you can change your wheel setup and just adjust the ride height based on your wheel setup. And you don't really have to worry if it's going to rub or whatever, because you can just adjust it. And then another pro is if you get the coilovers with the option for dampening, that will pretty much adjust how stiff the ride is. So whenever you go over bumps, if you feel like it's too stiff, you can adjust the dampening and make it more damp. That way it's not as stiff. Now the cons. So one of the cons is price. So these are a little bit more expensive than lowering springs. And depending on the quality of the coilover you get, that's how long they're going to last. So some coilovers might last like 10 to 15,000 miles, and some coilovers might last 30 to 40,000 miles. And the lower you go with the coilover, the faster it's going to wear out. And that's mainly because it doesn't have much travel, so you're wearing it out a lot faster when it's really low. Another con is coilovers are not actually available for all cars. Lowering springs are not, lowering springs aren't available for all cars either, but they have a much more variety than coilovers. And a lot of people, what they do is they'll use coilovers from different cars and adapt them to their cars, but that just makes it harder for installation. If you're just the average DIYer, you might not want to do all of that, so you might have to just go with springs if they don't make coilovers. Another con when compared to lowering springs is it's going to take you a little bit longer to adjust the ride height and all that, and pretty much just take you a little while longer to install, mainly because you're going to be adjusting. And the last con is going to be that sometimes coilovers will make some kind of squeaking or like cracking noise. Not really cracking, but like whenever you go over a turn, you'll hear the coilover, like the spring inside the coilover might bind or might creak against like the helper spring or whatever. So you might have a little bit extra noise in the cabin because of the coilover. And that all depends on how low you're going. So you can buy coilovers on eBay, you can buy coilovers on any aftermarket websites that sell performance parts. And main thing you want to check for coilovers is the kind of warranty that they give. And also, like I said, check the forums. Forums, whenever you're doing anything on your car, the forums are your best option to look, because everybody's going to be documenting at least their experiences with different types of parts, different manufacturers, and even many different things that they do to their car. So if you can keep up with forums on your car, it's going to help you in the long run on DIYing everything, and just to see what you can buy for your car and what you shouldn't. So how much do coilovers cost? On average, you can get the cheapest set for, they make $300-400 coilovers, which are really bad, but average quality coilovers, you can get around $600 up to $15,000 to $2,000. And main reason the $1,500, $2,000 ones, they're a lot more race oriented, so you can do a lot more adjustability, they're better quality, they're going to last longer, but you got to make sure you can justify the cost for the coilover depending on what you're going to be doing with it. So that's it for coilovers. The final thing that we're going to be talking about today, and I believe is the most practical, is airbag suspension. I don't actually have an example of airbag suspension with me to show you guys, but I'll go ahead and tell you what they do. So airbag suspension, it pretty much is a bag full of air, and you have compressors, you have a tank, and you have to run lines all across. That way you can control how much air is in the bag, and the bag pretty much acts like a spring. So whenever you inflate the bag with certain PSI, it's going to be at that ride height. The more you inflate, the higher it goes. And that's pretty much how they work. And airbag suspension has come a long way in the past decade. There's so many more manufacturers out there. There's so much management out there. You can even manage how high your car is with your phone. So there's so many options out there for airbags. And main reason that they're, like I said, they're very practical is you can adjust them anywhere. Like you adjust them with your phone. You can even have a little controller in your center console. It's really easy to adjust. If you're coming up to a bump and your car is too low, you hit a couple buttons, it's going to get higher, and you can clear the bump without a problem. But installation. So airbag suspension now, especially now on cars that they make very many kits for, it's going to be easier to install, but it's still not as easy as coilovers or lowering springs. Main reason is because you have to run air hoses all the way through, you have to run wiring, and then you have to mount your tank, you have to mount your compressors. There's many more parts that are required when installing an airbag suspension. So now what are the pros and cons? So like I mentioned, one of the best pros is you can adjust your ride height on the go. You can adjust it with your phone, with the switches, whatever you have, it's easy to adjust. And airbags typically last longer because most people, when they have airbag suspension, they're not going to be riding or driving very low. Their ride height when they're driving is going to be a little bit higher and almost close to stock. It might be a little bit lower. So they're going to last longer, and then you can, whenever you want to lower it, you can lower it. And the last pro is that you can actually go very, very low with the airbag suspension. You can literally just air out the bags. You can even have the fenders just sitting on the wheels. Of course, I wouldn't recommend that. You might want to do some kind of fitment clearance before you do that, but you can. And that's one of the best pros that you have because you pretty much have unlimited adjustability. Now the cons. The major con is going to be price. They are a lot more expensive than coilovers and lowering springs, of course. Another con is installation because you have many more parts that you're going to have to install. And most people will take it to professionals, which will bump up the price even more. Another con is all of the moving parts have more things to go wrong. So if the compressor is messed up, you could be on the middle of the road and your compressor dies, and then you might have a leaky bag, your air is going to leak out, you're not going to be able to hold the height. There's a lot of stuff that could go wrong. And also, they're not available for all cars. Coilovers are still more available for cars than airbag suspensions. Airbag suspension, they are starting to hit the mainstream market with AccuAir and all their management and all that. So a lot more cars are having bags manufactured. But there are other ways that you can do it, making a custom kit. So even if they don't make it for your car, you can go to a professional and get a custom kit made. And the last con is, like I said, you're going to have more parts with the airbag suspension. And some of those parts are going to have to go inside your car. Like you might want to put the tank and the compressors inside your car. This can cause your cabin to be a little noisier, and you might not have as much space as you did before after the installation. So where can you buy airbag suspension? You can buy it from a lot of aftermarket sites, once again, like ECS Tuning, FCP Euro. You can buy them off of eBay, which I highly suggest you don't. You can buy them off of Bag Riders and any other airbag retailers. If you look at the manufacturer of the airbag, they usually won't sell them on their website, but they'll have dealers for their kits that will sell them locally to you. You can find out your dealer based on your car. Now, how much do they run? So you can get the cheapest airbag kit with the lowest level of management, all that, starting at about $3,000 to $3,500, and they can go up to like $6,000 to $7,000 depending on what all you're doing. If you're going to have professional installation with like a false floor and all that, of course it's going to be a lot more expensive. But like the most basic kit, you're going to be looking at averaging around $4,000 completely installed. So those are the most practical, cheapest, and easiest ways to lower your car. I know there's more ways out there. and then there's the bad ways, there's more expensive ways. But like I said, the ones I've covered are the ones that are most common and practical, cheap, and easy. Let me know if you guys want any DIYs on installing coilovers and stuff. So that's it for this video, guys. Feel free to leave any comments down below, and thanks for watching.